The marble floor still held the day's warmth, but the air above it had already turned cold, humming softly beneath recessed lights that reflected like distant stars as Elias Vance moved his mop in slow, deliberate arcs. He worked without looking up. The rhythm was steady, predictable, almost meditative. Water, glide, lift. Water, glide, lift. Across the vast showroom, glass displays shimmered with curated perfection, handbags placed like artifacts, shoes aligned with mathematical precision, every surface whispering quiet wealth. The store smelled faintly of polished leather and citrus cleaning solution, a contradiction that lingered in the air long after customers left. No one noticed the man who maintained it. But Elias noticed everything. The scuff marks near the entrance that didn't belong to customers. The subtle misalignment of a display table that had been moved half an inch off-center. The flicker, barely perceptible, in one of the overhead lights near the back corridor. Details mattered. They always had. Near the far corner, seated cross-legged on a low bench, Lila Vance pressed a crayon carefully against thick paper, her small fingers steady with quiet concentration. The soft scratch of wax on paper drifted faintly through the silence. She didn't interrupt him. She never did. Elias glanced at her only once, briefly. Just enough to confirm she was still there. Still safe. Then his eyes returned to the floor. No one in that room would have guessed what he had once built, or why he had walked away from it all 15 years ago. Not from the way he wore his faded uniform, sleeves slightly frayed at the cuffs. Not from the way he kept his head lowered when footsteps echoed too close. And certainly not from the way he accepted invisibility like it had been earned. He preferred it that way. Most nights ended like this. Quiet. Controlled. Predictable. But not tonight. The sharp click of heels disrupted the stillness long before the door opened. Elias paused. Just for a fraction of a second. The sound carried authority, measured, unhurried, deliberate in its announcement. Whoever approached didn't rush. They expected the world to adjust instead. The glass doors parted with a soft hydraulic sigh. Cold evening air slipped inside. And with it came Victoria Hale. She didn't belong to the night shift. That alone was enough to shift the atmosphere. Tall, composed, wrapped in a tailored charcoal coat that fell in clean lines past her knees, Victoria moved through the store like she was inspecting a possession rather than entering a workplace. Her heels struck the marble with crisp finality, each step echoing louder than it should have. A store manager trailed behind her, already tense. "I didn't know you were coming tonight," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "You weren't supposed to," Victoria replied, her tone smooth, almost bored. "That's the point of an inspection." Her eyes moved quickly. Not wandering, assessing. Inventory. Displays. Staff posture. Control. Then she saw the child. She stopped. The silence that followed wasn't loud. It was sharp. "What is that?" she asked. The manager hesitated. "That's Elias's daughter. He sometimes." "I didn't ask for context." Her gaze didn't leave Lila. "I asked what she is doing here." Lila looked up slowly, her crayon pausing midline. Her wide eyes moved from the stranger to her father. Elias had already set the mop aside. He walked toward them, measured and calm, his expression unreadable. "She stays with me after school," he said quietly. "Only until closing." Victoria turned her attention to him now, and there was something in her expression, not anger, not yet. Something colder. Assessment. "You bring a child," she said slowly, "into a controlled luxury environment, during operational hours?" "It's after hours," Elias replied. "Not for the brand." The manager shifted uncomfortably. A sales associate nearby pretended to adjust the display but wasn't subtle enough to hide her attention. Victoria stepped closer, her gaze dropping briefly to Elias's uniform, then rising again with faint distaste. "This isn't a daycare," she said. Elias nodded once. "I understand." But he didn't move. That was the first mistake. Victoria's lips pressed into something resembling a smile, but without warmth. "No," she said. "I don't think you do." She turned, her voice lifting just enough for others to hear. "This is exactly how standards erode. One exception becomes permission. Then discipline collapses." The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. Lila slowly stood, clutching her drawing. Elias felt it, the shift in the room. Eyes watching. Judging. Waiting. He crouched slightly beside his daughter, his voice softer now. "Go stand by the door," he said gently. "I'll be there in a moment." She hesitated. Then nodded. Small steps. Quiet obedience. Victoria watched the exchange with narrowed eyes. "Unbelievable," she muttered. As Lila passed her, something subtle happened, small enough that most wouldn't notice. But Elias did. Victoria stepped aside. Not to make space. To redirect. Her hand extended, not forceful, not violent, but firm enough to guide Lila faster than she intended. The motion was sharp. Dismissive. A push disguised as direction. Lila stumbled slightly before catching herself near the entrance. The sound of her shoe scraping against marble echoed louder than it should have. And then, silence. The kind that presses against the ears. Elias stood very still. For a moment, nothing in his expression changed. Then he walked to his daughter, placed a steadying hand on her shoulder, and straightened her posture with quiet care. His fingers brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You're okay," he said. She nodded again, but her eyes had changed. Something fragile had been touched. Elias turned back. Victoria was already watching him, arms crossed now. "If you're done," she said coolly, "you can finish cleaning outside. Effective immediately." A pause. "And don't bring her back." The words landed harder than they sounded. The manager looked down. No one spoke. Elias held Victoria's gaze for exactly 1 second longer than expected. Not defiance. Not submission. Recognition. Then he nodded. Understood. He picked up his mop. No argument. No explanation. Just compliance. But something had shifted. Deep beneath the stillness. Because as he turned away, guiding Lila gently toward the door, a name echoed quietly in his mind. Victoria Hale. He knew it. Not from tonight. From somewhere older. Buried. And far more dangerous than she could possibly understand. The glass doors opened again, releasing them into the cool night air. Behind them, the store remained bright. Untouched. Perfect. Inside, no one moved for several seconds. Because something about the silence he left behind felt unfinished. And no one, not even Victoria, could explain why. Outside, under the dim streetlight, Elias knelt beside his daughter. "You did nothing wrong," he said quietly. She looked at him, searching his face. "I know," she whispered. He smiled faintly. But it didn't reach his eyes. Because for the first time in years, the past he had buried was no longer content to stay hidden. And somewhere deep within it, a truth was beginning to surface. One that would change everything. The hum of the store returned with morning light, sharper now, layered with the soft chime of incoming customers and the faint, constant tapping of heels against polished marble. By noon, the air felt different. Heavier. Tighter. Elias noticed it before anyone said a word. He was near the rear corridor, replacing a flickering light panel he had marked the night before. The ladder beneath him creaked faintly with each shift of his weight, metal legs pressing into the floor with a hollow echo. From here, he could see the reflection of the main showroom in the mirrored wall. Too many people moving too quickly. Too many voices rising at once. Something was wrong. He climbed down slowly, wiping his hands on a cloth tucked into his belt. The scent of dust and heated wiring lingered faintly on his fingers. Then came the first sharp sound. A register beep, long, continuous, wrong. Followed by another. Then another. A ripple of confusion spread outward. "What's happening?" one of the associates whispered, her voice thin with uncertainty. My system just froze, another said. At the front, a customer's voice cut through the air, irritation barely restrained. Excuse me? Is anyone going to finish this transaction? Elias stepped into the open floor. The lighting still gleamed. The displays remained pristine. But the illusion, the seamless perfection the store depended on, had cracked. At the central counter, a young cashier tapped frantically at the screen. It's not responding, she said, panic creeping into her tone. It just locked. The store manager rushed over, already pulling out his phone. Reset it, he said quickly. I did. Twice. A pause. It's not just this one, another employee called out. All terminals are down. A subtle shift moved through the room. Customers began exchanging glances. Some stepped back. Others crossed their arms, impatience hardening into expectation. This wasn't just an inconvenience. This was failure, public, visible, expensive. Elias stood still for a moment, listening. Not to the voices. To the pattern beneath them. Registers. Network signals. Timing. Then he moved. Not hurried. Not hesitant. Just precise. He walked past the main counter, ignoring the looks, some confused, some dismissive, and headed toward a side panel near the service corridor. It was unmarked, flush against the wall, designed to disappear into the architecture. Most people didn't even know it existed. Elias did. He knelt beside it, fingers brushing the edge. A soft click. The panel opened. Inside, a maintenance terminal flickered faintly, its interface stripped down, functional, hidden from standard operations. It wasn't meant for sales staff. Or managers. Or anyone currently employed in this store. The glow of the screen reflected in his eyes as he powered it fully on. Behind him, the noise escalated. We're going to lose these sales, someone muttered. Where is Victoria? Another asked. No response, the manager said tightly, lowering his phone. Elias exhaled once. Then his hands moved. Fast, but controlled. He navigated through layers of back-end access that required not just familiarity, but memory. Old pathways. Legacy systems that had never been fully removed, only buried beneath updates and cosmetic redesigns. His fingers hesitated once. Just once. As a login prompt appeared. For a fraction of a second, something passed through his expression. Not doubt. Recognition. Then he typed. A string of characters, too quick to follow. The system paused. Processing. Behind him, a customer's voice rose sharply. This is unacceptable. Do you know how much time I've wasted here? Another register emitted a harsh error tone. And then, silence. Not complete. But enough. The terminal screen shifted. Access granted? Elias didn't look back. He was already inside. Lines of code. System diagnostics. Network routing paths. The problem wasn't random. It was structural. A corrupted update had triggered a cascading failure across the payment network, something that should have been caught before deployment. But it wasn't. Because whoever approved it didn't understand the system they were controlling. Elias did. He traced the fault line quickly, isolating the broken segment. His fingers moved with quiet certainty, rerouting data through a dormant backup channel that hadn't been used in years. A system within a system. Forgotten. But not by him. The air felt still now, like the moment before a storm breaks. Then, a single register beeped. Short. Clean. Correct. The cashier blinked. Wait. She tapped the screen again. It responded. Try it again, Elias said, his voice calm, almost distant. She did. The transaction processed instantly. Another register came back online. Then another. Like lights returning in sequence. The tension in the room didn't explode. It collapsed. One breath at a time. Within less than a minute, the entire system stabilized. Customers resumed their purchases, though slower now, glancing around as if unsure what had just happened. The manager stood frozen, staring at the terminal Elias had just closed. "How did you?" he began. Elias stood, wiping his hands again. "Temporary reroute," he said simply. "You'll need a full system check later." "That system isn't even accessible from here," the manager said. Elias shrugged lightly. "It is if you know where to look." A pause. The words hung in the air longer than they should have. Nearby, two employees exchanged glances. One of them whispered, "He's a janitor." The other didn't respond. Because something about that explanation no longer fit. Elias stepped away from the panel, closing it with a quiet click. He picked up his cart, adjusting the handle slightly as if nothing unusual had happened. But the room had changed. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough. People were watching him now. Not dismissing. Not ignoring. Watching. The manager followed him a few steps. "Elias, wait." Elias stopped. "You've done this before," the manager said carefully. Elias considered the question. Then gave the smallest nod. "A long time ago." "Where?" "A beat." Elias met his eyes briefly. "Somewhere that doesn't matter anymore." He turned and continued walking. No further explanation. No performance. Just absence. From across the floor, behind the glass walls of the upper office, Victoria Hale had arrived. No one saw her enter. But she saw everything. Her arms were crossed, her expression unreadable as she replayed the security footage on a tablet, watching Elias kneel, access a hidden system, and restore operations with a precision that didn't belong to his position. She paused the video. Zoomed in. His hands. Steady. Familiar. Not guessing. Knowing. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Interesting," she murmured. Below, Elias continued his work, already back to cleaning a surface that had never appeared dirty. The illusion was restored. But something beneath it had shifted. Because now there was a question in the room. Unspoken. Unanswered. And growing louder with every passing second. Victoria set the tablet down slowly. Her gaze fixed on him through the glass. Not with curiosity. With calculation. "Who are you?" she said softly. "Really?" Elias didn't look up. But somewhere, deep beneath the silence he carried so carefully, the past had begun to move. And this time, it wasn't going to stop. The fluorescent lights in the back office flickered faintly, casting a pale, uneven glow across stacks of paperwork as the low hum of an aging air conditioner pressed against the silence like something restless and unseen. Victoria Hale did not sit. She stood behind the desk, one hand resting lightly on a thin file folder, the other tapping once, slow, deliberate, against its edge. Elias Vance. The name sat on the cover in clean, printed text. Too clean. Too empty. She opened it again, though she had already read every line twice. Employment history incomplete. References redacted. Previous addresses inconsistent. There were gaps, years at a time, where the record simply stopped. For most people, that would suggest instability. For Victoria, it suggested something worse. Control. Someone had erased parts of this man. And people with erased histories didn't belong in her system. They disrupted it. She closed the file with a soft snap. "Find everything," she said without looking up. Across from her, the store manager shifted uneasily. "I've already requested additional verification, but..." "I didn't ask what you've done," she cut in. "I told you what to do." A pause. "Dig deeper." Her voice lowered slightly. "Because a janitor does not reroute a proprietary system that even corporate engineers struggle to access." The implication settled heavily in the room. Something wasn't right. And Victoria intended to prove it. Elias felt it before anything happened. The change. Subtle at first. People stopped speaking as freely when he entered a room. Conversations clipped themselves short. Eyes lingered just a moment too long before looking away. Suspicion had a texture. And it followed him now. He kept working. Same rhythm. Same precision. But he noticed the cameras more. The way they angled slightly differently. The way a supervisor appeared twice in the same corridor within minutes, pretending not to watch him. He said nothing. Because he understood something they didn't. The more they looked, the more they would find. And that was exactly what he had spent 15 years avoiding. That evening, the store felt colder than usual. The kind of cold that settled into the bones, even beneath warm lighting and polished surfaces. Lila sat near the entrance again, quieter than before, her drawing untouched in her lap. Elias noticed. He always did. "You're not drawing," he said softly as he passed her. She shook her head. "Not today." He crouched beside her, his voice low. "You don't have to come here anymore," he said. "I can find another way." She looked up at him, her eyes searching. "I like being with you," she said simply. The words landed deeper than she understood. Elias nodded once. Then stood. And returned to work. Because some things couldn't be explained. Only protected. The call came just before closing. "Elias Vance?" A voice echoed across the store. Sharp. Official. Too loud for routine. Heads turned. Elias didn't. He finished the motion he was in, the slow wipe of a glass surface, before setting the cloth aside. Then he turned. 2 men stood near the entrance. Security. Not the usual staff. Corporate. Their posture was different. Their presence deliberate. The room shifted again. Customers lingered longer than necessary. Employees pretended not to watch. But they were watching. They always were. Elias walked toward them calmly. "Yes?" One of the men held a tablet. "We need you to come with us," he said. "For what reason?" A brief glance exchanged between them. "Internal investigation." The words were carefully chosen. But the message was clear. Elias nodded once. "Of course." No resistance. No surprise. Just acceptance. Lila stood as he passed her, her small hand reaching instinctively for his sleeve. "Dad?" He paused. Kneeling again, he met her eyes. "You remember what I told you?" he asked gently. She nodded slowly. "Stay calm." "And?" Her voice was quieter now. "Trust you." A faint smile touched his lips. "Good." He stood, placing a light hand on her shoulder before stepping away. The distance between them felt longer than it should have. The back office door closed with a dull, final sound. Inside, the air felt tighter. Victoria sat now, the file open in front of her. She didn't gesture for him to sit. So he remained standing. "Elias Vance?" she began, her tone smooth, controlled. "Or whatever your name actually is." Elias said nothing. She slid a document across the desk. Inventory discrepancies. Missing items. Numbers that didn't add up. "You've had access to restricted areas," she continued. "You've demonstrated unauthorized system knowledge. And now," she tapped the paper lightly, "we have losses." A pause. "Explain that." Elias glanced at the document. Just once. Then back at her. "I can't explain something that isn't true." Her lips curved slightly. "That's unfortunate." She leaned back. "Because truth is a flexible concept when documentation exists." Another silence. Heavy now. Pressing. "You're being formally accused of internal theft and misconduct," she said. The words were clinical. But their impact was anything but. Elias felt it, not as panic, not as fear. As consequence. Not for what he had done, but for what he had once been. "You understand what that means," she added. He did. Termination. Blacklisting. Legal action. A future closed before it could begin. Still, he didn't react. Which, somehow, irritated her more. "Say something," Victoria said sharply. Elias met her gaze. Calm. Unshaken. "You've already decided," he said quietly. Anything I say won't change that. The truth of it lingered. And for a fraction of a second, she hesitated. Then the moment passed. Security will escort you out, she said. Effective immediately. The walk through the store felt longer than it ever had. Every step measured. Every eye watching. No one spoke. Because humiliation didn't need narration. It thrived in silence. Lila stood near the door, her small figure framed by the cold glow of the street outside. When she saw him, she didn't ask questions. She just reached for his hand. And he took it. Firm. Steady. As if anchoring both of them. Behind them, the store remained perfect. Unchanged. Untouched. But something fundamental had shifted. Because this time, Elias wasn't just being dismissed. He was being erased. Hours later, the apartment was quiet. Too quiet. The kind that made every small sound feel louder. The ticking of an old clock. The faint hum of a refrigerator. Lila had fallen asleep on the couch, her drawings still clutched loosely in her hand. Elias stood near the window, looking out at the dim street below. The city moved on. It always did. Unaware. Unconcerned. On the small table beside him sat an old file. Worn. Edges softened by time. He hadn't opened it in years. Didn't want to. Because inside it was everything he had left behind. Everything he had sacrificed. Everything that could destroy what little peace he had built. His hand hovered over it. Still. Then slowly. He opened it. Inside were documents. Signatures. Photographs. And one name, printed clearly across the top of a contract that should never have existed outside a boardroom. His name. Not Elias Vance. The one before. The one the world had forgotten. The one that, if revealed, would change everything. He exhaled slowly, closing his eyes for just a moment. Because the truth was no longer optional. It was coming. Whether he wanted it to or not. And this time, it wouldn't stay buried. The conference room smelled faintly of polished wood and expensive cologne, the air cool and controlled beneath recessed lighting that cast sharp reflections across a long obsidian table. Elias Vance stood at the far end of it, alone. No uniform. No mop. No lowered gaze. Just a dark, well-fitted suit that seemed untouched by time, as if it had been waiting, patiently, for this exact moment. Outside the glass walls, the city moved in muted fragments, cars sliding past like shadows, distant lights blinking in quiet indifference. Inside, the room held a different kind of stillness. The kind that forms before something irreversible. A legal assistant adjusted a stack of documents near the center of the table. Two senior executives spoke in hushed tones. A compliance officer, sharp-eyed, deliberate, sat with a tablet open, reviewing data that had already begun to unravel more than anyone had expected. And at the head of the table, Victoria Hale. Composed, as always. But not untouched. Her fingers rested lightly on the surface, though the subtle tension in her posture betrayed something beneath the calm. Her gaze flicked once, briefly, toward Elias. Then away. As if refusing to acknowledge him too soon might still preserve control. It wouldn't. The door closed behind the last attendee with a soft, final click. The sound lingered. Sealing the room. Sealing what came next. 24 hours earlier, it had felt like everything was over. The accusation had spread faster than truth ever could. Internal theft. Misconduct. Termination. Elias had watched it happen without interruption, because he understood systems, not just the technical ones, but the human ones. And this system had been designed to collapse him quickly. Efficiently. Quietly. But systems had weaknesses. And sometimes those weaknesses wore the face of someone who still believed in integrity. Her name was Daniela Cross. Senior Compliance Officer. She had been the first to notice it, the inconsistencies buried too carefully within Victoria's reports. Numbers that aligned too perfectly. Timestamps that didn't match operational logs. At first, she thought it was an error. Then she looked closer. And the pattern revealed itself. Not chaos. Design. She found Elias that night. Not in hiding. Not running. Just sitting in the dim light of his apartment, the file open in front of him like something long overdue. "You know why I'm here," she said. Elias didn't ask how she found him. He simply nodded. "Yes." She stepped inside, placing a tablet on the table between them. Data filled the screen: inventory records, access logs, audit trails. "All of it leads back to her," Daniela said. "But it's buried under layers of authorization." Elias glanced at the screen. Then at her. "You'll need more than anomalies," he said. "I know." A pause. Then, quieter. "I need the truth." The room seemed to hold its breath. Because truth, in Elias's world, had never been simple. He looked at the file. The one he had avoided for 15 years. Then back at her. "If I give you that," he said, "this doesn't stay contained." "It already isn't." Another silence. He studied her carefully. Measured. Then, slowly. He nodded. Back in the present, the room settled as the final executive took his seat. "All right," one of them said, clearing his throat. "Let's begin." Victoria straightened slightly. Professional. Controlled. "This meeting was called to address internal discrepancies and confirm the termination of an employee involved in." "I think we should start somewhere else." The voice cut cleanly through the room. Not loud, but absolute. Every eye turned. Elias stepped forward, placing a single folder on the table. The sound it made, soft against polished stone, felt louder than it should have. Victoria's gaze sharpened instantly. "You don't speak in this room," she said, her tone tightening. Elias met her eyes. Calm. Unmoved. "I do today." A flicker of irritation crossed her face. But before she could respond, Daniela spoke. "I authorized him," she said. The shift was immediate. Subtle. But real. Authority had changed direction. Victoria's jaw tightened. "On what grounds?" Daniela turned her tablet toward the executives. "On the grounds that the investigation was compromised." A ripple moved through the room. "What are you implying?" Victoria asked. "I'm not implying," Daniela replied. "I'm presenting." She tapped the screen. Data appeared on the central display, clear, undeniable. Timestamps altered. Inventory logs manipulated. Authorization trails rerouted. Each point precise. Each connection leading back. To Victoria. The silence that followed wasn't confusion. It was recognition. Slow. Heavy. Inevitable. Victoria leaned forward, her voice sharper now. "This is circumstantial. Data can be interpreted. Not this way." Elias spoke again. And this time, no one interrupted. He opened the folder. Inside were documents older than anything on the screen. Original system architecture. Foundational access protocols. Signatures. His signature. Not Elias Vance. The other name. The one buried. The one that had built everything they were now sitting inside. A senior executive frowned, leaning closer. "Where did you get these?" he asked. Elias didn't look at him. His eyes remained on Victoria. "From the place they were created." A pause. Then, "I wrote them." The words didn't echo. They settled. Deep. Final. Confusion flickered across faces. Then realization began to form. Slowly. Reluctantly. Victoria shook her head once, a quiet, disbelieving motion. "That's not possible," she said. But her voice had changed. For the first time. It wasn't certain. Elias reached into the folder again, sliding one final document forward. A contract. Original incorporation. Ownership structure. Majority stakeholder. The name was unmistakable. The room went still. Completely. Because now, They understood. The janitor. The man they had ignored. Escorted out? Accused? He wasn't an employee. He was the foundation. Victoria's chair shifted slightly as she stood, her composure fracturing at the edges. No, she said, quieter now. This is some kind of fabrication. Elias finally looked away from her. Not dismissively. Just finished. You built your authority on a system you never understood, he said calmly. And when something didn't fit, you tried to erase it. A beat. You chose the wrong thing. Daniela stepped forward. Security is already reviewing the full audit, she said. External counsel has been notified. Victoria's eyes moved quickly now, from the documents, to the executives, to the door. Calculating. Searching for an exit that no longer existed. 2 security officers appeared. Not rushed. Not aggressive. Just inevitable. The same quiet inevitability Elias had carried for years. Ms. Hale, one of them said. We need you to come with us. For a moment. She didn't move. Because power doesn't disappear instantly. It resists. Even at the end. Then slowly. Her shoulders lowered. And the illusion broke. As she was escorted toward the door, her gaze passed Elias one last time. Not with anger. Not even with hatred. But with something far more fragile. Understanding. Too late. The door closed behind her. And the room fell into silence. The second kind. The kind that changes everything. Elias stood there for a moment longer. Not triumphant. Not relieved. Just still. Because the truth hadn't freed him. It had only returned him to a world he had chosen to leave. One of the executives cleared his throat. We didn't know, he said. Elias nodded slightly. I know. Another leaned forward. You should have come forward sooner. A faint pause. Elias's gaze drifted briefly to the city beyond the glass. Then back. I had something worth protecting. The words ended the conversation. Because some things didn't need further explanation. But even as the room began to shift, as consequences took shape and control restructured itself around truth, one question remained. Not in the room, but in Elias himself. Now that he had stepped back into the light, what would it cost him to stay there? The morning light fell softly across the showroom floor, filtered through tall glass panels that turned the marble into a pale reflection of the sky, as if the store itself had been lifted into something quieter, something almost honest. It no longer felt the same. Not to the people inside it. And not to Elias Vance. He stood near the entrance, hands resting lightly at his sides, his posture unchanged despite everything that had shifted around him. The same floors he had once cleaned in silence now echoed differently beneath each step, less like a surface to maintain, more like a place that had finally been seen for what it was. Imperfect. Human. Real. Employees moved carefully, their voices softer, their movements more deliberate. There was no announcement that morning, no grand declaration of change, but something had settled into the walls, into the air itself. Accountability. It didn't shout. It stayed. Across the room, a display table had been rearranged, slightly off balance, its symmetry not quite right. Elias noticed it instantly. Of course he did. For a brief moment, he considered adjusting it himself. Then he didn't. Because that was no longer his role. And yet, it still was, in a way that no title could redefine. The official outcome had come quickly. Victoria Hale was gone. Not reassigned. Not quietly transferred. Removed. An internal investigation expanded beyond the store, uncovering patterns that stretched further than anyone had expected. Legal proceedings followed, methodical, thorough, irreversible. The system had corrected itself. But not without cost. Because systems never truly reset. They carried the memory of what they allowed. Elias had been offered everything. Control. Authority. A position that matched the name they had finally remembered. The boardroom had felt colder than the showroom ever had, despite its polished surfaces and measured voices. "We want you to take your place," one executive had said, hands folded carefully as if presenting something sacred. Elias had listened. Quietly. Then shook his head. Not in refusal. In restraint. "I never left because I couldn't lead," he said calmly. "I left because I understood what leadership costs." They hadn't argued. Because something in his voice made it clear. This wasn't negotiation. It was decision. Instead, he proposed something else. A restructuring. Not of power. Of perspective. Policies rewritten to protect the unseen roles, the ones that kept everything functioning without recognition. Oversight systems redesigned so authority could no longer operate without accountability. Quiet changes. Lasting ones? The kind that didn't rely on one person to enforce them, but ensured no one could abuse them again. By afternoon, the store had settled into a new rhythm. Not perfect, but aware. And awareness changes everything. Elias walked through it once, not as inspection, not as ownership. As memory. Each step carried something with it. The long nights. The silence. The quiet dignity of doing work no one praised. He paused near the back corridor. The same place where he had opened the hidden panel. It remained closed now. Unremarkable. Invisible. Like he once was. For a moment, he rested his hand lightly against the wall. Not to open it. Just to remember. Then he let it fall. "Dad?" The voice was small. Familiar. He turned. Lila stood near the entrance, her hand gripping the strap of her small bag, her eyes scanning the room with quiet curiosity. But this time, no one told her to leave. No one redirected her path. No one pushed. Elias walked toward her, his expression softening in a way the world rarely saw. "You came early," he said. She nodded. "They said I could?" A simple sentence. But it carried weight. Permission. Belonging. He crouched slightly, adjusting the strap on her shoulder where it had twisted. "Do you want to see something?" he asked. Her eyes lit up, not dramatically, just enough. "Yes." He stood, taking her hand. Not because she needed guidance, but because he wanted to give it. He led her to the center of the store. To a polished table once reserved for private clients. The kind of space defined by exclusivity. By separation. Today, it was empty. Waiting. Lila hesitated slightly. "Are we allowed here?" she asked. Elias looked at her. Really looked. Then nodded. "We are." She climbed onto the chair slowly, placing her bag beside her before pulling out her sketchbook. The same one she had carried through quiet evenings and uncomfortable silences. But her hands moved differently now. Lighter. Freer. Elias sat across from her, not speaking. Just watching. Because this was what had always mattered. Not the boardrooms. Not the systems. Not the power he had once held. But this moment. This quiet. This chance for her to exist without being pushed aside. Around them, the store continued its careful rhythm. Employees passed by, some offering small nods, others pausing briefly as if unsure whether to speak. Elias acknowledged them when they did. Not as a superior. Not as a symbol. Just as someone who understood what it meant to be seen, and what it cost when you weren't. One young associate approached hesitantly. "Sir?" she began, her voice uncertain. "I just wanted to say." She trailed off. Searching. Elias waited. Patient. "Thank you," she finished. Simple. Honest. Enough. He nodded once. "You're welcome." She smiled faintly, then stepped away. And the moment passed. As all moments do. Hours later, the light began to fade again, softening into the same evening tones that had once framed a very different ending. But this time, nothing felt unfinished. Elias stood near the entrance once more, Lila beside him, her drawing complete. She held it up for him. It wasn't perfect. Lines uneven. Colors outside their boundaries. But in the center, two figures stood. One tall. One small. Side by side. Elias studied it carefully. Then smiled. "It's good," he said. She grinned. "I know." He laughed softly. Because she did. Outside, the air carried the faint chill of evening again, brushing lightly against his face as they stepped through the glass doors. The same doors. The same threshold. But a different world beyond it. Elias didn't look back immediately. When he did, it wasn't with ownership. Or regret. Just understanding. Because the place that had once reduced him to silence had revealed something far greater in return. Not who he was, but who he had always chosen to be. He took Lila's hand again as they walked into the dimming light. Steady. Unhurried. Certain. And for the first time in a long while, nothing followed them. No shadow of the past. No weight of what had been buried. Only the quiet presence of what remained. A father. A daughter. And a life built not on recognition, but on something far more enduring. Because in the end, the world does not define a man by the titles it gives him, but by the dignity he refuses to surrender when no one is watching.